I knew my wife was plotting a divorce, so I secretly secured my assets. 2 weeks later, she demanded everything, then begged for mercy when she got zero. I never thought I would be the guy sitting here telling a story like this. You read these things online and you always think, well, that is terrible, but it could never happen to me. I am 38 years old and my name is Victor. If you had asked me just a month ago to describe my life, I would have told you that I was the luckiest man on the planet. I would have told you that my wife, Samantha, who is 36, was the absolute center of my universe. We have been together for 6 years and married for 4 of them. Those were not just any 6 years. They were the kind of years where you build a foundation so deep and so strong that you believe a hurricane could not knock it down. When we first met, neither of us had 2 dimes to rub together. I was working double shifts at a logistics company, coming home smelling like diesel and stale coffee, just trying to keep my head above water. Samantha was working a dead-end retail job and trying to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. I loved her drive and I loved her spirit. I told her to quit that job and go back to school to get her degree, and I promised her I would take care of the bills. And I did. I worked my fingers to the bone, picking up every ounce of overtime I could find, just so she could study without worrying about the rent or the groceries. We lived in a tiny, drafty apartment, but it felt like a mansion because we were in it together. Things were incredibly solid between us. We were not just husband and wife. We were completely committed colleagues in this business of life. We had this rhythm that just worked effortlessly. On Friday nights, we had a strict tradition of ordering Chinese takeout, always extra spicy kung pao chicken for me, and sweet and sour pork for her. We would sit on our cheap, lumpy couch for hours, arguing playfully about which movie to stream, usually ending up watching some terrible 90s action flick that we both secretly loved. We had these stupid inside jokes that no one else in the world would understand, the kind that could make us burst into laughter in the middle of a crowded grocery store. I always prided myself on being a good, attentive husband. I did not want to be one of those guys who gets married and then stops trying. When she had a long day at her new corporate job, the one she got after finishing the degree I helped support her through, I made sure her favorite dinner was waiting for her. She would organize elaborate date nights for us, finding little hidden gem restaurants around the city, and it felt like we had figured out the whole love thing. There were no major blowouts, no screaming matches, no toxic jealousy. We shared our finances openly, we left our phones lying around, and we completely trusted one another. It was a perfect, peaceful life. Or, at least, that is what the illusion was. That is why what happened next struck me like a ton of bricks, completely shattering the reality I thought I lived in. The shift did not happen overnight. It was not some dramatic event where a switch was flipped. It started around 6 months ago, and at first, it was just minor details. They were the kind of things you would likely miss if you were not paying close attention to the person you love. It started with the phone. For the first 5.5 years of our relationship, Samantha treated her phone like a paperweight. It would sit on the coffee table for hours, completely ignored, playing background music on Spotify. She did not care who picked it up or who looked at it. Then, suddenly, she began carrying it everywhere. I noticed it first on a random Tuesday evening. I was washing the dishes, and she got up to go to the kitchen for a glass of water, and she took the phone with her. Then she started taking it into the bathroom while she showered. She was bringing it to the laundry room when she was just folding clothes. It was as if it had become an extension of her hand. One evening, trying to keep the mood light, I made a joke. I smiled and said, "What are you running some secret spy ring now?" She chuckled, but it was a tight, nervous sound, and she quickly added that work had just been emailing her a lot lately. I bought it. Why wouldn't I? But a few days later, I went to change the song playing on her phone, and I was greeted by a lock screen requesting a passcode. That one genuinely caught me off guard because she had never used a password before in her life. When I casually inquired about why she suddenly locked it, she avoided eye contact and responded with something vague about corporate security policies and hackers. I did not press the issue. The absolute last thing I wanted to be was a paranoid, controlling husband. I told myself to let it go, to respect her privacy. But deep down in my gut, it simply felt off. And it did not end there. A new, bizarre habit emerged. Whenever she set the phone down, which was rare, she started keeping her face down on the table. I had no idea that was even a thing people did intentionally until one night when we were eating dinner. I reached over across the table to hand her the salt shaker, and she actually flinched and hastily moved her phone out of the way, making sure the screen stayed plastered to the wood. It was one of those blink-and-you-miss-it moments, a split-second reaction driven by pure panic, yet it stayed with me, burning a hole in my mind. I was fighting a terrible internal battle, desperately trying to convince myself that my wife was not hiding anything, while every instinct I had screamed that something was deeply wrong. The phone was just the beginning of the growing distance between us. It was not just about digital secrets. A physical and emotional chasm was opening up right in our living room. She began taking calls outside the room, a behavior completely foreign to our usual open-door policy. Before, she would happily chat on speakerphone while we cooked dinner. Now, it was entirely different. Her phone would ring, and she would flinch slightly, looking at the screen with a calculated expression. It wasn't subtle either. She would abruptly stand up and say, "Oh, let me just grab this real quick," before disappearing into the bedroom and firmly shutting the door behind her. Sometimes, she would step outside onto the porch. I remember sitting on the couch on a chilly November evening, watching her through the glass door. I could see her breath in the cold air under the porch light as she paced back and forth, talking in a hushed, intense tone. When she finally came back inside, rubbing her arms from the cold, I casually inquired who it was. She didn't look me in the eye. She just waved her hand dismissively and said, "Just a friend from work." The worst part was how distant she started to feel. Conversations that used to flow so easily, the effortless banter we built our marriage on, now felt like pulling teeth. She was physically present, but mentally, she was a million miles away. I tried to bridge the gap. I brought up future plans, trying to spark some excitement. I asked her, "Where should we go for our anniversary this year?" Or, "Do you think we should start saving for a new car?" In the past, she would have pulled out a notebook and started planning immediately. Now, she would simply stare at the television, give a slow nod, and say, "Yeah, we will see," before completely shifting the subject to something mundane like the weather or groceries. It felt like I was living with a stranger who happened to wear my wife's face. I would lie awake at night, listening to her steady breathing, wondering what I had done wrong. Had I been working too much? Had I stopped being romantic? I was torturing myself with guilt, trying to fix a puzzle when I didn't even know what the picture was supposed to look like. The silence in the house was becoming deafening, and the space between us on the bed felt like an ocean. I knew a storm was coming, but I had no idea how violent it was going to be until a random Wednesday afternoon shattered my denial completely. It all finally came together for me on a random Wednesday. It was an ordinary, gray afternoon. Earlier that morning, Samantha had informed me that she was seeing a buddy for coffee after work. It did not sound strange at all. She does that occasionally to catch up with her girlfriends from college. I had the afternoon off and happened to be running some errands in the exact same area where the cafe was located. I had just picked up some dry cleaning and was feeling pretty good, so I figured, why not surprise her? I thought it would be cute to pop in, buy them some pastries, and say hello. I parked my car a little way down the street and started walking toward the cafe. When I arrived, however, she was not sitting inside laughing with her friend. She was standing alone outside on the sidewalk. She was walking back and forth, pacing with a nervous, electric energy, her phone pressed tightly against her ear. I stopped dead in my tracks. I remained standing near my car, hidden behind a large oak tree, because something about the way she spoke seemed incredibly serious. Her face was animated, her gestures were sharp, and she looked thrilled but secretive. I swear I did not intend to eavesdrop. I am not that kind of guy. But the street was relatively quiet, and her voice carried over the crisp afternoon air. As I stood there frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs, I overheard specific phrases that made the blood drain from my face. I clearly heard her say, "It is almost ready," and then, "Starting fresh soon." My stomach completely sank. I felt like I had been punched directly in the gut. I couldn't figure out the exact context of what she was saying, but my instincts were screaming at me. It did not sound like a conversation about a job offer, and it definitely did not sound like she was giving advice on a friend's conflict. It sounded grander, much more calculated. It sounded exactly like something she had meticulously planned. I stood behind that tree for what felt like an eternity, unable to breathe. My hands started to shake, gripping my car keys so hard they dug into my palm. A wave of paralyzing fear and absolute clarity washed over me at the same time. The hidden phone, the new passwords, the late-night porch conversations, it wasn't a phase, and it wasn't work. She was building an exit strategy. I didn't confront her right then and there. I couldn't. I was too in shock. I quietly unlocked my car, got back in, and drove away in a complete daze, my mind racing with a million horrifying possibilities. When Samantha finally returned home that evening, the air in our house felt incredibly thick, at least to me. I was sitting on the couch, my mind still replaying those words over and over again, almost ready, starting fresh soon. I asked her how her coffee date went, desperately attempting to maintain a casual tone while my insides were twisting into knots. She didn't skip a beat. She sat down, kicked off her shoes, and told me a complete, incredibly detailed narrative about her pal complaining about her difficult boyfriend. She looked me right in the eyes and lied with a smoothness that genuinely terrified me. And then came the pivot. Out of nowhere, she dropped an unexpected comment that was so calculated I just gazed at her for a second in sheer disbelief. She sighed, pretending to be stressed by her friend's imaginary drama, and said, "I just think we should have everything in one place. You know, like all our account info, passwords, documents, that kind of thing." She paused for dramatic effect, then added, "Just in case of an emergency." "What do you mean?" I inquired, my voice sounding hollow. She shrugged, her expression completely innocent. "It is just smart, isn't it? What if something happens to one of us, or what if we need to make a big financial decision quickly?" I wasn't sure what to say. This was a topic we had never, ever discussed before. For 4 years of marriage, we had kept our systems separate and loose, trusting each other implicitly. The timing of this suggestion seemed incredibly strange and downright sinister given everything else I had noticed, especially what I had heard just hours prior. Her argument made perfect sense on the surface, but something about the way she expressed it made me incredibly nervous. It was too rehearsed. It was polished, like a corporate pitch she had practiced in the mirror, as if she had just been waiting for the appropriate time to casually bring it up. "What kind of emergencies?" I inquired, attempting to keep my tone light and casual, playing the role of the oblivious husband. She shrugged again, her eyes briefly darting away. "I don't know, just life stuff. It is not a big deal, I promise. I just think it is something we should get on top of." I nodded slowly, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance, and murmured something like, "Yeah, I guess that is a good idea." But inside my head, massive alarm bells were ringing loud enough to deafen me. "Why no? Why are we suddenly so concerned about organizing our finances?" Her response seemed so ambiguous, far too vague to be innocent. The way she avoided providing a direct answer made me profoundly suspicious. It didn't seem like a casual suggestion from a caring wife anymore. It felt like a trap. It felt like she was concealing something massive, but I needed hard proof. That night, my mind kept reliving her words, attempting to figure out the full scope of what it meant. Was this just typical adult behavior? Was I reading too much into it? But then I remembered the phone calls, the hushed talk I overheard in the cafe, and how physically and emotionally distant she had been recently. It all began to mount up, and I absolutely did not like the image it was painting. I could not sleep. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up, my heart pounding a heavy rhythm of betrayal. The next day, while she was safely at work, I decided I could not live in the dark anymore. I had to look into our finances. With shaking hands, I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into our joint bank account online. I took a deep breath before clicking on the transaction history. What I discovered was entirely unexpected, and it made the blood freeze in my veins. At first glance, the balance looked mostly normal. But when I started scrolling line by line, looking at the past month, a pattern emerged. Over the last 4 weeks, a few tiny moves had taken place. There was nothing large enough to trigger a fraud alert or send an automatic text message to my phone, but there were consistent, small quantities being transferred out that did not appear to have a clear purpose. $40 here, $60 there, $80 on a Tuesday. I exported the statements into a spreadsheet and started doing the math. They were not designated for utility bills, they were not for groceries, and they were not for anything similar to our usual expenses. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my pale face. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the math did not lie. It appeared undeniably that she had been systematically withdrawing money from the account, bleeding it slowly, for some hidden reason which I couldn't figure out yet. She was siphoning off our shared funds to build her own secret getaway stash. The heartbreak I felt the day before morphed into something entirely different in that moment. It turned into a cold, hard, terrifying logic. My wife, the woman I had broken my back to put through school, the woman I loved more than anything, was quietly robbing me blind while smiling to my face. I considered addressing her right when she walked through the door, screaming and demanding answers. But a primal survival instinct told me to wait. If I confronted her now without the full picture, I would look ridiculous, she would deny it, and she would simply hide her tracks better. And if I was correct about what she was planning, I had to be incredibly careful. The marriage was dead, but the war for my future had just begun. Thank you for listening so far. If you're hooked on the story, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below with the name of the city you are living in. Every comment helps this video reach a wider audience. Thank you very much. The air in my house felt like it was made of lead after I saw those bank statements. I couldn't just sit there and wait for the roof to fall in. It was eating me alive, so the very next morning, I contacted someone I trusted implicitly. Marcus was an old college friend of mine, a guy who had spent the last 15 years becoming one of the sharpest lawyers in the state. We hadn't spoken in a few months, but when I told him I needed to talk about something serious, he cleared his schedule immediately. We met at a small, out-of-the-way diner where I knew nobody would recognize us. I laid it all out for him, the phone, the secret calls, the cafe incident, and the strange requests to organize our finances. I tried my best not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but my voice was shaking as I handed him the printouts of the small, weird withdrawals. Marcus listened in silence, his face unreadable as he sipped his black coffee. When I finally finished, I looked at him, desperate for him to tell me I was just being paranoid. But he didn't. He set the cup down and looked me straight in the eye. He told me that I wasn't insane for wanting to be ready. He said that while he couldn't say for sure what Valerie was up to, the red flags were waving so hard they were practically screaming. He told me that if I was concerned about protecting the assets I had worked my entire life for, now was the absolute moment to do so. He leaned in and said, "Better safe than sorry, Victor." He spent the next hour walking me through exactly what I could do. He explained simple but powerful legal procedures to ensure my finances were protected if something catastrophic happened. He talked about trusts, asset protection, and the legalities of property transfer. I'll admit that hearing about taking such drastic action felt completely out of the ordinary. It felt like I was preparing for a war I didn't want to fight, even though I still had a tiny, flickering hope that I was wrong. But the more I considered it, the more Marcus's words made sense. If she was really up to something, and I was starting to suspect she was, I needed to defend myself. I couldn't afford to be the last person to know my own marriage was over, and I certainly couldn't afford to be left with nothing after everything I had sacrificed for her. Deciding to go through with Marcus's plan was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It wasn't just about the money or the house, it was about the life we had created together over 6 long years. As I drove home from the diner, my mind kept replaying images of us like a movie I couldn't turn off. Our wedding day under that big oak tree, the late-night conversations about our dreams, and the weird little jokes we shared that only made sense to us. How did we arrive here? Was this really what our marriage had come to? The prospect of taking these measures felt like conceding defeat, as if I was officially abandoning the trust we previously shared. That evening, while Valerie was out, she told me she was at a late work meeting, though I didn't believe a word of it anymore. I sat at my desk and took out my laptop. My hand shook so hard I could barely type as I opened the computer and began browsing through every single thing we owned. I looked at the bank accounts, the investment portfolios, and the property deed to the house we had spent years turning into a home. Each paper I studied felt like a fresh betrayal of the vows I had taken, but a persistent voice in my head kept reminding me that this was about survival, not sabotage. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I didn't want to leave her destitute. But I couldn't shake the idea that if I didn't act right now, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I felt a crushing weight settle against my chest as I compiled a list of everything I could transfer. I had to be smart. I had to do it without raising any suspicion. I began the process of transferring the majority of my assets into a legal, irrevocable trust. I moved the cash, the long-term investments, and the most painful part, the house, into the trust under my mother's name. As I clicked confirm on each transfer, I felt a piece of my heart go cold. I had entirely trusted this woman for years, and now here I was, playing defense against the person I thought would always have my back. It was a lonely, agonizing night spent in the quiet of a home that no longer felt like mine. After I had initiated the paperwork, I knew I needed one more thing, a safe place for the documents to live. I called my mother, Martha, and explained that I needed her help, though I couldn't bring myself to give her every single sordid detail. I told her I needed her to hold on to some things for me for a while, and that it wasn't anything bad, just something I needed to do to protect myself just in case. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. My mother has always had a sixth sense for when I'm hurting. She asked if I was okay, her voice filled with a mother's anxiety. I lied and told her I was fine, that it was just a precaution, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice when she finally agreed. By the time Valerie arrived home that night, I had scrubbed my browser history and put on the best mask of my life. She walked in, kissed my cheek, and asked if I wanted to watch a movie just like she always did. To her, I appeared perfectly okay, but inside, I was a complete wreck. Part of me felt awful, as if I had betrayed her trust, but another part of me felt a strange, cold relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I was gaining control of a situation that had spiraled completely out of my hands. Over the next few days, I tried to maintain a completely normal routine. I didn't want to let her know that anything had changed. She appeared satisfied, even unusually cheery at times, which only made my skin crawl. Instead of putting me at ease, her happiness increased my suspicion. If she was plotting something, she was doing an excellent job of concealing it. What stood out to me the most was that she never brought up the finances again, not even once, after I had pressed her about it that last time. It was as if the subject had completely evaporated from her memory. At first, I tried to tell myself I had overreacted, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was avoiding the topic because she was afraid to bring it up again after I had challenged her. I caught her staring at me a few times, as if she was assessing my mood or contemplating her next move. The silence between us on that subject was deliberate, and it only made me more certain that the storm was about to break. 2 weeks passed, and the silence in our home became almost unbearable. To any outsider, everything appeared normal, too normal, frankly. Valerie was acting more loving, even starting to talk about random, superficial topics like her job or what we should have for dinner. It threw me off because she had been so aloof for months. Part of me began to question whether I had been overreacting all along. Maybe the strange behavior was just stress? Maybe I was the villain in the story? But then, on a random Friday night, the mask finally slipped. We were sitting in the living room when she reached over, turned off the television, and said those 4 words that every husband dreads: "We need to talk." My stomach fell instantly. I knew what was coming before she even opened her mouth. "I think we should get a divorce," she said. Her voice was so calm, so level, it felt like she was reading from a script she had practiced 100 times. It wasn't furious or emotional, it was simply frigid, as if she were telling me we had run out of milk. I sat there, staring at her, unsure how to respond as she launched into her prepared argument. She mentioned needing space, wanting to find herself, and feeling like she had lost her identity in the marriage. It was all standard breakup phrasing that didn't actually mean anything. But then she said something that made my blood boil. She looked at me and said, "You know, I've made a lot of sacrifices for you over the years, and I don't think you really appreciate them. I deserve more." That last part stung like a whip. It wasn't just that she wanted out, it was that she was framing herself as the victim, as if I owed her something. As I sat there listening, everything started to make sense. She mentioned that a friend had been helping her see things more clearly. I remained still, letting her speak, but my mind was racing. Who is this friend? Why were they so involved in my marriage? The way she talked about her sacrifices was laughable. I had backed her when she changed careers twice, telling her it was fine to take the risk because I wanted her happy. I had worked myself to the bone so she could go on expensive retreats and move closer to a job she wanted. I had shown up for every birthday, every anniversary, every bad day. She wasn't upset because of anything I had done. She was upset because she had changed, and she was trying to rewrite our history to fit her new narrative. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just nodded and said, "If that's how you feel, I guess we should figure out the next steps." She looked startled that I wasn't fighting for her, but my focus had already shifted to the fight for my life. Valerie moved into her own apartment almost immediately, and I received the official divorce papers on Monday. When I opened them, I realized she wasn't just looking for a clean break. She was looking to take everything I had. The demands were aggressive. Half the house, all my savings, my assets, the car. She even wanted spousal support despite having a high-paying salary of her own. It was clear she had someone guiding her, someone who knew exactly how to twist the knife. I started digging. I couldn't just ask her who she'd been talking to, so I had to be clever. I started with her social media. She hadn't blocked me yet, and while she didn't post much, I began searching through her tagged photos and comments. That's when I discovered the pattern. A guy named Preston was repeatedly liking and commenting on her posts. It wasn't anything obscene, but it was enough to make me pause. I clicked on his profile. At first glance, he seemed like just another marketing professional, but as I scrolled down, I spotted the smoking gun. He had posted a photo at the exact same cafe I had seen Valerie at weeks before. On the same day, I overheard her talking about a fresh start. My gut churned. There were more subtle signals, too. A comment on one of her pictures that read, "You've got this," and a selfie he'd taken from what looked like the balcony of her new apartment. It wasn't enough for a court, but it was enough for me. I wanted to know for sure, so I reached out to our mutual friends. I called Rachel first, but she was incredibly defensive, claiming she didn't know anything and quickly ending the call. Then I called Greg. He was apprehensive, giving me vague answers before hanging up on me, too. I sat there in the silence of my empty house, feeling like the entire world was gaslighting me. But then, to my astonishment, another friend named Fiona called me back. She told me she needed to make sure what she said didn't come back to her. I promised it wouldn't. She revealed that Valerie had been spending a massive amount of time with Preston, whom she met at work, and that Preston was being very active in the divorce advice she was receiving. Hearing that name felt like the final puzzle piece clicking into place. This wasn't about finding herself. It was a calculated, premeditated strike to leave me with nothing while she walked away with him. The first mediation session felt like walking into a freezer. From the moment I stepped into the room, I could feel the hostility. Valerie was there, looking polished and cold, sitting next to a lawyer who had arrived with a binder so thick it looked like they were bringing a case against a Fortune 500 firm. Her lawyer didn't waste any time. He began listing her demands as if they were the most reasonable things in the world. He wanted half the house, the cash, the investments, the car, even a slice of my retirement. I sat there in silence, appearing to listen, but really I was just watching her. She looked so confident, so sure that she was about to walk away with a massive payday. She didn't even look at me. She just stared at her lawyer, nodding as he described how much I owed her for her years of sacrifice. It was a masterclass in entitlement. I waited patiently, my own lawyer, Marcus, sitting calmly beside me with a small, flat folder on the table. When it was finally our turn, Marcus didn't make a long, dramatic speech. He didn't argue about her sacrifices or the car. He simply reached into his folder, handed a stack of paperwork across the table, and said, "Before we proceed, I think it is important for everyone to review these." Valerie's lawyer took the papers with a smirk, but his posture changed almost instantly. As he flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed deeper and deeper. The silence in the room became heavy, the kind of silence that usually precedes a disaster. He looked at the papers, then at Marcus, and finally at Valerie with an expression of pure frustration. "What is this?" he inquired flatly. Marcus didn't blink. "These documents show the transfer of all major assets into an irrevocable trust under my client's mother's name," he said, his voice as calm as a summer morning. He pointed out the dates, showing that the transfers were completed and notarized several weeks before the divorce filing. He explained that the trust was fully legal and uncontestable. The room became utterly silent. Valerie snatched the papers from her lawyer's hands, her face flushing a deep, angry red as she stared at the notarized signatures. The look on her face when she realized her plan had just turned to dust was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. Valerie's face went from disbelief to pure, unadulterated rage in a matter of seconds. "You planned this," she muttered, looking at me as if I were the one who had committed a heinous crime. She was shaking, the papers crinkling in her hands. "You knew I was going to file and you set this up to screw me over." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. I just sat there and let her connect the dots on her own. Her lawyer was visibly agitated. He started trying to find a loophole, asking Marcus to elaborate on the legality of the move. Marcus was more than happy to oblige. He went through the evidence slowly and deliberately, showing that every signature was duly notarized and every transfer was solid. The dates aligned perfectly, indicating that I had moved everything well before she ever mentioned a divorce. There was absolutely nothing they could do to challenge it. The legal trap she had tried to set for me had snapped shut on her instead. She was furious. "You are unbelievable," she said, leaning forward in her chair, her voice trembling. "I can't believe you would do something like this to me." I still didn't say a word. What was there to say? This wasn't about me doing something to her. This was about me defending myself from what she was trying to do to me. The meeting ended abruptly. Her lawyer muttered something about needing to rethink their strategy, but everyone in the room knew they were finished. As we walked out of the building, Valerie cornered me in the hallway. Her expression was a toxic mix of rage and desperation. "This isn't over," she added, her tone low and threatening. "You are going to regret this." I finally looked her in the eye, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel any pain. I just felt pity. "I already regret trusting you," I told her. "That is the only regret I have." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the hallway, clutching a stack of papers that were worth absolutely nothing. Things escalated even faster than I expected after that session. Valerie went into a complete meltdown. She started calling me endlessly. One minute she was sobbing and saying she made a mistake. The next she was screaming and accusing me of being cruel and stingy. I followed Marcus's advice and didn't engage. When the calls didn't work, she started telling people the divorce was a hoax, a prank that had gone too far. But the holes in her story were too big. Friends started asking why she'd hired a lawyer and made such specific demands if it was just a joke. Then, the truth finally came out. A guy named Julian, who knew both me and Preston, reached out to me. He had seen the texts between Valerie and Preston. Preston had been gloating about how he was helping Valerie secure her future by bleeding me dry. Julian felt awful about staying silent and showed me the screenshots. The messages were chilling. Valerie had written, "Once the settlement is done, we'll have everything we need." Preston had replied, "Don't back down. He owes you. We'll start fresh once you've got the money." Julian shared those texts with a few people, and they spread like wildfire through our social circle. Suddenly, Valerie's victim narrative evaporated. People who had been neutral or even on her side instantly distanced themselves when they saw the cold, calculated manipulation she had been planning with her lover. By the time the divorce was finalized, she had nothing left but her personal belongings. Her lawyer quietly dropped the case because there was no legal ground left to stand on. The most poetic part? Preston vanished the second he realized there wasn't going to be a big payout. He had been feeding her fantasies of independence, but once the money was gone, so was he. Valerie was left completely alone. Her calls became increasingly desperate, begging me to talk, but it was too late. Even her own brother contacted me to apologize for ever taking her side. As for me, I got the house, my savings, and something much more valuable, my peace of mind. My mother arrived with buckets of paint, and we spent the weekend reclaiming the house as my own. She is just a chapter in my history that I no longer read, and the rest of the story is entirely up to me to write. She's now reaching out to my mother, begging for just a fraction of what she thought she deserved, crying that she has nothing left. Am I wrong for ignoring her completely, or should I show her a little mercy after 6 years of marriage? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.